wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast. My name's Steve, coming to you from Conway, Arkansas. And this week we are rejoined by Racine. He's a school teacher and college instructor, author, and former guest host of the Sunday Stoic podcast, episodes 206 and 210. Make sure to check them out. But Ryan, welcome back to the Sunday Stoic podcast.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here.
And you might be able to hear my son talking in the background. I'm recording at home and they just got home, so we can hear their conversation as well. But, you can only have the studio you have, not the one you want to have. So bear with me, everybody. So, Ryan, what have you been up to lately? Teaching?
Just winding down the year for teaching. I'm from Canada, so typically in public school, the kids get out at the end of June. So I'm going to be finished next week. And after that, this is actually my very first summer I'm not teaching summer school. I've usually taught summer school in July and August. So it's kind of my first summer off in my career. So I'm excited.
Yeah, that's great. I'm kind of doing the same thing. I took the summer off to be home with my son. But where in Canada do you reside?
Niagara Falls, Ontario.
Oh, okay.
I'll
be up, not quite there. I'll be up in northern-ish Michigan soon for holiday, for vacation. So cool. It won't be that far away. But I did grad school in Alberta, so that was kind of the opposite end of the continent. But
yeah,
great. So I know you wrote a book, and how about I mention it now, just for those listening. The Stoic Teacher, Ancient Mind Hacks to Help Educators Foster Resiliency, Optimism, and Inner Calm. And so let's just start with what got you into teaching to begin with? Let's go down that path. What led you to become a teacher?
Sure. So I think I had some inspiring teachers back in elementary school and in high school. And so I made the decision in grade 12 to pursue teaching at the post-secondary level. So the way that looks like in Canada is I took something called the concurrent education program. So you're basically doing 2 degrees at the same time. You're doing your major. So I was doing English, and then I was doing my education degree at the same time. So every year I would be able to dabble a little bit in education. I'd usually get a placement at some point, and I'd be able to practice teaching throughout my university career, which is neat because the other way you could go about getting qualified in Canada is by just doing teacher's college after your degree. Now, if you do that, the only thing is you don't get that experience throughout your undergrad. So I was able to get some experience throughout my undergrad, enjoyed it. I did my master's in English after teacher's college. And at the time, I was becoming kind of cynical of teaching. I thought, maybe I don't want to be a teacher. There's probably better things to do, whatever that even meant. And so I decided maybe I want to do like a PhD. Was going through the master's program, applied for my PhD, got into it, went to see to a university I got into and went to see what the life of a PhD student was, and it didn't appeal to me at all. So then I declined that, was kind of in limbo thinking, okay, what do I do next? Do I fall back on my teaching degree? Do I maybe pursue something else? I was studying to get into maybe law school. And then I decided I don't really want to be a lawyer either. So I thought, let's just try the teaching thing out. So my first year teaching, I taught grade 4, which is very different. I only did high school in my practicum. So it was very eye-opening. It was a very tough experience. And I had a very difficult class, but I was grateful for the experience. And after that, I was able to get into teaching some high school English. At the same time, I was able to teach at my local college English, like part-time as well. So I was kind of balancing both of them. And then I got into my career, which is what I've been working in the past couple of years, which is in alternative education. And what that is basically for students who have been expelled or suspended from their high schools, they come to me along with some other teachers, and we're trying to not just get them to earn some credits, but as well just try to coach them in certain things, certain skills related to life that maybe they might be lagging. And so I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and I've enjoyed it. It is a tough job, but I find it's very rewarding, and that's what I really like about teaching. It is rewarding, and I like my colleagues. I am switching now, transferring back into a regular at high school teaching English again. So decided it was a good time in my life to get back into regular education. But so far, I've been teaching for about 5 years. I joke, I say between teaching grade 4, I also taught a bit of music. I taught rotary music in elementary school for a few months. I said, I've taught every grade from JK to college. I mean, again, some of it I was just doing music with the kindergartens, but still I say I've taught every grade in 5 years. I joke around and say that. So yeah, it's been quite a journey so far. And that kind of inspired me to write this book about Stoicism and teaching.
So what age range is the most difficult to manage or to teach in the classroom, would you say?
I would say elementary school. I think that, so my fiance is actually a teacher, and she teaches grade 8. And I think that grade 7, 8 level is pretty tough, because I know in Canada what happens is we have this inclusive model of teaching whereas before, when I was in high school a little while ago, students from different abilities would be in their own separate classes, kind of like what it's like in high school in public education. Well, now what happens is they're all in the same class, so the teacher has to plan for kids who are working at all different levels. So you might be teaching a grade 8 class, but in fact, you're teaching some grade 8, you're teaching students who are maybe working at a grade 7 level, grade 6, all the way down to some of them might be working at a grade 1 or 2 level. And so the planning is, I see what she does, the planning is crazy. Of course, when you're dealing with kids who are at different levels, the behavior, is different. So you have to manage the behavior a lot. So I think that grade 7, 8 is probably really tough, because I know in high school what's happened is, again, students are more streamed. So at least when you get the students, they're all kind of working at a similar level. So you kind of know how to tier things. But when you're in elementary, you're given all the kids, and you have to try to figure it out by yourself.
And that's where Stoicism can help, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so what led you? We saw how you got into teaching. Well, how did you discover and begin to practice the philosophy of Stoicism?
So I remember the first time I heard the word Stoic or Stoicism was back when I was in university. I was taking a Shakespeare class, and I don't remember what play we were reading. But anyways, our professor referred to one of the characters in a play as a Stoic, and I didn't really know what that even meant. The only idea I had was that kind of popular idea that, oh, they're emotionless. So that's what I kind of took from that idea. They kind of just brushed over it and just kept going on with their lecture on Shakespeare. So that was my first mention of Stoicism in that, in my life, kind of. And then later on, after I graduated university, well, in university, I did study a lot of philosophy, but it was more, I would say, contemporary philosophy. Like my master's thesis was on trauma theory and eco-criticism and poetry. So I was reading a lot of contemporary thinkers, and obviously the ancients talk a lot about like what it means to live a good life. These theorists and philosophers are not talking about that. They're talking more about more like abstract ideas, critique of society kind of thing. So that's what I thought philosophy was. I didn't read much of the ancients, just like Socrates. It's about it. And so later on, when I was kind of struggling early on in my teaching career, when our government had slashed a bunch of teaching jobs, and I was worried about my job and worried about the future, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was saying like, oh my goodness, like I don't know how I'm gonna get through this. It's so difficult. I can't even think. And he kind of just gave me some simple words of reassurance, but just like, it's really tough what you're going through, but you just can't be preoccupied all the time with what's going on, in society with these kind of cuts that are being made by the government. Just focus on bettering yourself as a teacher. Focus on those things you can control. and the rest, you could deal with it as best as you can, but focus on that, and maybe you won't be going through such turmoil. So I took that advice, and I kind of later on, I had heard of this kind of general advice before, but I said, where did you get that from? A little while later, and he said, well, I've been reading a bit about Stoicism, and then kind of clicked, oh yeah, Stoicism, that's that philosophy I heard about in university, in that Shakespeare class. And then I started reading some secondary sources. I think Ward Farnsworth was one. I read a little about like the popular ones like Ryan Holiday, Donald Robertson, Bill Irvine. I think was my first book that really helped me give a great overview of Stoicism.
The gateway drug. I call his book the gateway.
Yeah,
drug.
It was a great introduction.
A lot of people. Yeah.
I really liked it because it was a philosophy, again, like I mentioned about the ancients, like it's a philosophy of what it means to live a good life. And what's mentioned by the Stoics, it's not like you have to do this. It's not like a religion. You have to do this, and if not, you're not going to live a good life. They're all, suggestions. They're all meditations, and I really like that because then I could think through what makes sense for me, what doesn't make sense for me. And it was just a philosophy that really focused on like inner transformation, and I really liked that. So I got into it. Read some of the primary texts after reading the secondary ones, like the Enchiridion and Meditations and some of Seneca's essays, and kind of the rest is history.
Great. Well, thanks for that. It's always interesting to hear how others found the philosophy. But now you've written a book that combines your expertise and love of teaching with your knowledge of philosophy, and how the two can combine to make a better teacher. But let's assume that a lot of the listeners aren't teachers, because I'm sure they are not. Some of them might say, well, teaching, that's easy. Like, why would you need to have a Stoic philosophy to help you be a better teacher? You just show up, you say some stuff, you go home, big deal. It's such an easy job. What are some of the challenges that teachers actually face, whether they're beginning their career or they're a long way towards retirement as teachers? What are they going to encounter in that classroom or at home that will make it a challenging career?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think, Ken, I kind of alluded to it before, but differentiation for a lot of teachers is really tough. So a lot of teachers were told that, and rightfully so, because it's not like the old cartoons or movies where the teachers just, especially in public education, they're not just standing at the front of the class lecturing, the students are just writing down the notes all day for every single class, right? You have to be able to plan for each student, because each student learns differently. You have to figure out your students, and sometimes when you're planning for a student, it doesn't go well, you spend hours doing that, so you feel, oh, did I waste my time doing that? So a lot of the planning and delivery needs to be very unique and well thought out. So that takes hours and hours. It's not just kind of the schedule that the students are there. It takes hours outside of that schedule to be able to plan that. So that's really tough. Depending on where you're teaching, dealing with parents can be very difficult. I remember when I taught a summer program where I took some of the students and we actually did an exchange program in the UK. They were earning their English credit and studying English literature. The students paid big bucks to go there, and guess what? After every assignment, I was flooded with emails from parents saying they deserve this, they got to go to engineering, and I had to navigate that stress, and I had to, kind of deal with some very angry parents at times. So the parent demand is tough. Admin demand is really tough. Obviously, going virtual when the whole pandemic was here was a really difficult pivot, and of course, just student behavior. So nowadays, I know it's being reported more, but students are misbehaving more than they ever have. They're dealing with mental health issues more than, it's ever been documented. So, when you're up there and if a student is not paying attention or calling you names, or another two students are getting into conflict, you have to figure, okay, how do I productively deal with this without, contributing more craziness to the situation? So all those different things, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other things I'm missing. They're all reasons why teaching is a very stressful career. And even those times off, in the summertime, I mentioned this summer, I'm going to be off for the first time of my career kind of thing. Well, I'm going to be spending that summer, because I'm starting a new job, kind of game planning for my next year, figuring out what I'm going to do, putting in the hours that way. So, a teacher is kind of always on, and they have to be like a performer in front of your class. You have to be on all the time. You can't just kind of tuck away and hide under your desk. You have to always be on. And that's a really stressful thing, because there's professions where you go in and you have a bad day. Well, you could sit behind, your cubicle there and don't really have to talk to anyone. Guess what? You have to be social all day, whether you like it or not. And that's a very difficult thing to do.
Yes, it is. And I know in grad school there in the University of Alberta, where I first was thrown in the deep end of the pool, as it were, for teaching. There were days where I definitely had the, as your book talks about, imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to be here? What am I doing? And then I had a lot of days where I questioned why I was doing this, because you fail a lot when you're learning how to do something as complicated as teach and explain things to a group and keep their attention and assess things fairly and all of that. It's a very complicated job in all reality. It's cool and rewarding once you start to get the hang of it, but it can be quite frightening and stressful at first.
Yeah.
So you want to walk us through? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and also like other jobs as well, and many teaching jobs are like that. It's a very precarious profession. So it is tough, especially if you're trying to get in at the college level or really any level. And this is like this in Canada, but I know in other countries as well. It's tough to get like permanent work. So all the time you're questioning whether you're doing the right thing. And I kind of write about this in the book. If your colleague gets praised and you don't, I would sometimes get in my head, like, why weren't I praised? What did I do wrong? And jump to these conclusions and made myself more stressed. So yeah, there's so many other political things as well in the profession that could really cause stress and really result in negative job performance. So
why don't you tell us a bit about your book and then how teachers can use Stoic philosophy, or at least techniques from Stoic philosophy, to become more resilient teachers?
Sure. So in terms of, I just want to quickly answer this, why I wrote it. I actually, so I was getting really stressed at my job, working with a lot of these at-risk students, and I was practicing Stoicism outside of my teaching life, like outside of the classroom. And then as soon as I entered the doors, I just didn't bring it with me. And I would kind of engage in kind of cynical conversations about all these kids, they're just awful. I can't wait to go home. And I mean, a lot of it was initiated by me. It wasn't like my colleagues. I was right in it because it was my way of coping. And then I just kind of realized one day, like, this is not a healthy thing to do. It's not contributing anything positive, right? I mean, I'm venting, which is great, and it's important to vent. But when I'm just doing it all the time and just bringing negativity to the workplace, it's not going to get me anywhere, and it's going to negatively affect my colleagues as well. So I decided, why don't I actually take some of the practices that I'm using in Stoicism for my personal life and apply it to teaching? So I started doing that. I'll get into some of the practices in a moment, but it did help me. Like, it did help me just being able to kind of not take things so personally and leave things at the door when I leave the room. And so, yeah, it did help me. And then I realized, I wonder if anyone's writing about this, or anyone's writing about kind of teacher resiliency in this particular way. So I did a lot of research out there to see what books are out there, what articles are out there. And it was just crickets. Like, there's so much out there on teacher self-care, which is really important. There's a lot on teacher burnout. There is a growing movement on teacher mindfulness, like mindfulness kind of, I don't want to call it Eastern practices, but like a lot of the Eckhart Tolle kind of mindfulness stuff, which is all really great. But at the end of the day, like, things you could kind of do after the teaching day and things like that. But at the end of the day, there was nothing really on, like, in the moment, or when you're dealing with situations, how can you go about like reframing things, and what kind of mental techniques can you use to help you remain resilient? So then I thought, okay, well, why don't I just try to write this, whatever this turns into, and maybe it's an article. I published some things previously about, education and things like that. So I thought maybe I'll just write something out, see how it goes. And so I started writing it, and I thought, well, why don't I write like a couple things, and they could each be about like a certain Stoic practice. And then I realized maybe I could actually just write a short little book. I wanted it intentionally to be short because I know teachers are really busy, and if they wouldn't be really intrigued to buy a 400-page book and have to read through it. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll just write a short little concise book, and it'd be something teachers could read over a couple of days, or depending on how much time they have, maybe over an afternoon. And it could give them just some kind of practices they could use right away in their life. So that's when I started writing. It took me probably as soon as the inception of the specific idea came out to write Stoic Teacher, probably a little over a year of working almost every day, about 30 minutes, first writing it, then editing it. And then I pitched it to some publishers. Some of the publishers ended up saying, hey, we really like this idea. It's not being done, but we don't really want anything to do with Stoicism. That's kind of like they would call it like a male-dominated Eurocentric philosophy, or they would say, I get a bad impression when I hear the word Stoic, so I don't want anything to do with it. So, kind of rechange the book where you do something else in terms of the kind of theory part, and then you could keep the same practices. And I thought, well, I don't really want to compromise that part of it. That Stoic part is really important. So luckily, I found one publisher who was interested in it, keeping the Stoic part. So I went with them, did some, edits with them. It took a number of editing sessions, and got to the product. And here I am today. And it's something that I wrote not just for like other teachers, but also for myself, because I'm always trying to remind myself every day of these practices. So that's how the inception came. In terms of like some of the practices I get into, what I do is at the beginning of the book, I get into kind of a little bit of just a brief history of Stoicism and what is Stoicism, why is it relevant to teaching? And then most of the chapters are a different practice. So I know I kind of break it up as these are kind of before the school day practices you could do. And I talk about things like, I believe maybe the view from above, or premeditating on adversity, or embracing a little bit of kind of hardship at the beginning of your school day, which sounds a little bit weird to some. They're like, why would you want to do that? One thing that works for me is I would always be trying to get as much sleep and sleep in as long as possible when I was first teaching. And it only led to stress. I'd be coming into school feeling very much like, oh, I have to get this all done. I'm not prepared. And then I thought to myself, I'm going to actually get up a little bit early, add a little bit of kind of adversity there, a little bit earlier than I'd like to. Maybe add a little bit of a morning routine, do some journaling, do a little bit of exercise, nothing too strenuous. And after that, actually, my whole morning just felt, I just had so much more energy in the morning. And then going into the classroom, I had that much more energy because I just added those little moments of adversity, and I went through it. And then I felt, hey, I could get through that. I could get through other challenges throughout the day. And so that was one of the chapters. I get into some techniques you could use in the moment, and then as well, techniques you could use at the end of the day, especially related to reframing, which is really important. That's kind of some of the techniques that I recommend for teachers to use. And I also mentioned, like, just because I recommend them, don't use them all. They're not all going to work for you. Some might not work for you. They're all just suggestions, and they've helped me. And I hope they could help some other teachers.
That's great. Are you a cold shower guy for some of your morning self-imposed hardship?
I used to do it a bit, but now not so much. I think what I do more in the mornings is I try now. The last little bit, I haven't been getting up as early as I'd like, but I like the idea of getting up a bit early, doing a little bit of exercise to get the heart racing, even if it's a walk around the neighborhood or something. And then I like my journaling. I like my reading. I like a little bit of writing. Just some productive things to do in the morning. I have my coffee when I do it. That's kind of my reward when I'm doing this stuff. I tell myself I'm going to reward myself. I give myself a nice hot cup of coffee, and that's kind of the routine I do. And it's worked for me, and it's really given me a lot of energy in the morning, and just put me in a good mood to start.
Yeah. One that I need to reread, but maybe we could talk about briefly because it's something that happens sometimes often is having a bad day and then trying to figure out how to reframe an event that is, often it's the way someone acted or some news that was delivered to you from your boss or whatever, but you come home from the workday and it's, your day is shot and all you can do is stew over this bad thing that happened. You think of the whole day as it's crap and I got to do this again tomorrow. And so, but before I ask you about that, I wanted to point out that this book is also written as a workbook in some ways. There are places to reflect, actual physical spaces to write down answers, if you wish, to reflect on many of the techniques found throughout the chapters here. So that's something the listener might find interesting. But one of those techniques was reframing. And could you talk about what that means and how one might approach reframing? Because that would be helpful for anyone, not just a teacher, of course. A lot of these techniques would be useful for, you could call it the Stoic, I don't know, salesman or whatever. It could be helpful for a lot of different positions, especially those where we deal with people all day long.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's many ways you can reframe. I think a lot of it goes back to that dichotomy of control, which is at the end of the day, if you're stewing over something and you have no real control over it at the time, say something happens, colleague says something to you at the end of the day, or a student says something and leaves in a rage, and you're kind of stewing over it. At the end of the day, if you bring it home with you, what is that actually going to do but just kind of ruin your night, ruin different family members' nights, depending on if you project that on others. So yeah, everything I think goes back to that dichotomy. But in terms of reframing, I always like the idea of, and actually my principal says this, is think of something positive, even if it's the weirdest thing that could come out of that situation. So something that always used to disappoint me had to do with job interviews. So there were times when I would go for a job interview and I would either think I did really well or maybe not so well, and the result wasn't what I wanted to be. I didn't get the job. So when this first happened to me, I always thought to myself, oh, this is going to mean I'm never going to get a teaching job. I should just get into another profession. I jumped to conclusions instead of looking at what is one good thing about me not getting this job. And I would actually kind of map out some possibilities. Maybe it means, when the time comes and I would have gotten that job, maybe that job wouldn't have been what I actually thought it would be. Maybe something else is on the horizon that if I were to take that job, this potential opportunity would not come up. And that's happened a number of times. Later on, shortly after, something else would come up, which would be way better suited for me. And I thought, well, if I went with that initial thing, my trajectory here in my career would have been very different. So, that's what I think. What is something positive that I can take from this situation, even if it's something that is a little bit of an unknown, because at the end of the day, that's how you have to get through it. Is you have to look at a positive. It doesn't mean, I know there's this whole, everyone's talking about negative positivity. It doesn't mean if something absolutely awful happens to you, you just think, oh, well, this is great. That's not what it means at all. And I read in the book as well, and I know the Stoics are okay with this, is when you're dealing with something that upsets you, it's totally okay to feel those feelings, right? And, you shouldn't repress them or ignore them. There is a time when you can deal with them. But yeah, learning how to put them aside at times and figuring out how to still go forward in society, go forward in our career is really important as well. So finding the positive is, I think, the main way that I look at reframing. I know I talk about some other ways. I can't recall off the top of my head. It's been a little bit since I've had to go through that chapter, but that's one that sticks with me, and I continue to use, every day. Even if I'm dealing with a student who is just giving me such a hard time, I think to myself, wow, think about what this is going to teach me later on in my career when I'm either dealing with a similar student or dealing with a student who is nowhere near this level, And I think I have this tool now about, being patient and trying to work with a student who might be having difficulty. So, thinking of a positive, I think is a really important thing to reframing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, thinking about I'm here to work with this person, and not only that, this is a learning experience for me as well, and will make me even better, more effective in the future. Yeah, it's a good way to reframe situations like that. That reminds me, one of your other chapters discusses the importance of finding a role model or role models. Have you had role models in your teaching career
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
have assisted you along the way?
I've had role models who might not know they're role models. I've had actual mentors. So the cool thing is, in Ontario, in the province I live in Canada, in Ontario, they actually have a program for new teachers. It's called the New Teacher Induction Program. And part of the program requirement is you have to choose a mentor teacher that you work closely with for an entire year. So this teacher is someone that it's part of the program to schedule meetings with them, to watch this teacher teach, to have this teacher watch you teach. It's a brilliant program, and I love it because it allows you to be okay with feeling like vulnerable as a teacher. Like, I don't know many things. I'm still new to things. I feel like I'm always a work in progress. And to be able to go to another teacher, bounce ideas off of them, and have them watch me teach, which is a very vulnerable thing to do, but being open to that, I think, is a really cool thing. So I've actually had like technical mentors on paper who I've worked with, other more seasoned teachers. And yeah, I've had different role model teachers as well who I've gone to. It could be a teacher that I've had in the past when I was back in high school or elementary school. It could be a teacher who I work with, who I kind of bounce ideas off of. But I'm very much in favor of teachers looking to others and being okay with going to others to help them. Because in this profession, I talked about that, competitiveness of jobs. A lot of times we feel like we're on our own all the time. We have to come up with all the solutions on our own, all the problems on our own. But really, we have to network as a team and be willing to learn from others. And that's a great thing Stoicism teaches, is that, yeah, we need those mentors and role models or sages. You can almost make up your own super teacher by taking qualities you like about different kind of teachers and thinking, what would the sage do here? But yeah, I really think it's important because, the Stoics have shown it's an important part of life to show that, again, you're always willing to learn. And that's what, as a teacher, you have to be willing to learn all the time, and going to another teacher and being open and saying, hey, I need some help here. And in the book, I kind of lay out, there's different ways you could do that, because some people might be weirded out because it's a very different kind of concept. You don't have to say, hey, do you want to be my mentor? They might say, oh, I don't have time for that. You could say it in different ways that isn't so intimidating, but still gets the same point across. You could say, hey, I really like how you're doing that in your class. Can we sit down one afternoon? You could show me how you do that. And those conversations lead to great growth as a teacher.
Now, flipping that on its head, inevitably, as you grow and become better at your job, you will one day, or perhaps already, be someone else's mentor. And that's something we don't talk about as much. Is there anything we need to keep in mind, whether we're teaching or mentoring in some other fashion? But let's talk about it, from a Stoic perspective or from a teaching perspective. What kind of qualities does a mentor need to have to be good at that role? Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's a good question. I think kind of very similarly to someone who is looking for a mentor, you have to still adopt that. And I know there's a word in Stoicism. I know Brittany Pollitt has spoken about the word. I just can't think of it. But it's this kind of same idea as kind of like growth mindset, but it's not growth mindset. It's for Stoics. But anyways, having that same kind of growth mindset and thinking I don't have all the answers. I know I've had teachers come to me, especially my profession now, teachers who have come and gone in my specific program and have asked me questions, and I've given them some suggestions, but I've also said, like, also keep in mind, like, you have a different class than me. So what I'm giving you might not work with your class. And I also tell people, like, if you see something going well in my class, like you're walking by, it doesn't mean it's going well all the time. So being very honest with, whoever you're working with, whoever you're mentoring, I think is really important. And again, showing that you're still learning is really important. So yeah, being humble, I think, is really important. That's a really important Stoic characteristic. Yeah, so I think that's one thing. I don't know. I think it all goes back to that idea of being willing to learn, being willing to make mistakes. Sometimes we get complacent, and some teachers might create that big folder that they just refer to every single year and don't change things at all. Don't change anything in their pedagogy. And I've been really actually inspired with the pandemic and seeing some kind of older teachers who are close to retirement, who are willing to go to PD sessions and learn and change up their pedagogy. And I'm like, you don't have to do this. You're a year from retirement, and they're still coming to these kind of professional development opportunities and asking questions and wanting to learn from their colleagues. And I absolutely love that. And that's someone I look up to. Like, when I see that, I think, wow, I want to be like that when I'm near the end of my career. So yeah, I think it all goes back to the idea of being willing to learn. That makes a great mentor.
Yeah, I'd say for them, the passion is still there. They still care about their students and want to be effective at their position. Whereas, the about to retire teacher I see in my mind is jaded and phones it in and teaches it the same way now as they did in 1978. And I'll be damned if I'm going to change. But it's inspiring to hear about folks that are updating the way they do things, even though they're about to retire. That's great.
Yeah, and I really like as well teachers who have like a real optimism for their students. Like, there was a book I read by Mark Edmondson, who's a really great writer. He's from the University of Virginia, I think. And he writes about teaching and English literature. And he said he kind of taught at some like hippie high school or something. And it would, the students were just apparently behaviorally absolutely off the wall. And he ran into the old principal one day and he said, wow, like that school was just, those kids were just completely, write-offs. They couldn't really do anything. And his principal said, no, that wasn't the case. They needed more time, right? In our system, we just can't give them the time that they need to develop. And he's like, that's really an interesting way to think of it. Like, they have this like Emersonian just hope for the next generation, because it's so easy to just say, oh, this next generation sucks. They're just so lazy. But having a real optimism of students and being, saying, hey, you know what, they bring such a great perspective on things and a great skill set. I really respect teachers who do that, who aren't just, jaded and saying, oh, all the students suck. It's not like it used to be. So.
Yeah, I could use a shot of that positivity from time to time. I'm afraid I find myself thinking the negative thoughts. I need to apply a little more stoicism to my to my day occasionally. But I mean, when you step back and think about it, this job, there are probably very few jobs that you can do that can have as much impact as being a teacher. You're interacting with so many students and either making them love or detest a certain subject, depending on how effective you are, and giving them skills to thrive and grow in whatever trajectory they're on. And that's a really beautiful thing if you take the time to step back and look at it. Now another thing, I just wanted to ask if you had any to share. You say it's a good idea to have as the Stoics do as well, a maxim at hand. Have you created any of your own teaching maxims just to get you through unique situations that you face as an instructor?
I mean, I do like that saying, like, this too shall pass. I do refer to that quite often in my head. I would like to have more maxims in my room. Like, sometimes I'll have them in previous classrooms. I haven't set it up in my current classroom. Maybe next year I'll have them maxims there in my room that not only students can use, but I could refer to as well. I know I have some like motivational posters up, but not specific personal mantras, but or maxims. But yeah, I like this too shall pass, because I think when I'm, in a very difficult situation with, say, a student or anything, I always think to myself, kind of like that view from above, I'll be able to get through this. I'll be able to learn from this. And again, this will only make me better in the long run. So I like that, because at times when something happens in a classroom, and it's, say a student tells you off, says, "Hey, you're the worst teacher I've ever had in my life," right? And you think that's the end of the world for you, like, there's no recovering from that. Well, yes, there is, right? And it's something you can laugh about down the road. Oh, I remember when that student said that. Oh, yeah. And then sometimes I talk about this in the book. Sometimes you got to add kind of humor and honesty. Actually, you know what? Out that day, I had no patience, and I said something I shouldn't have said, and that led that on. And yeah, I was the worst teacher that day in the world. Something you could add some humor. But yeah, I think this too shall pass. I always refer to all the time in my head, because it just teaches me that, even in the worst situations, there's always an end point, and I'll be able to get through it and progress in my career. So it's not the end of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I sometimes have to read a little Stoicism before, as a college instructor, and you've probably had this too. You get actual evaluations from your students back. So a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds writing about how they felt about your instructional methods. And so you never know what you're going to get when you start reading through those. Normally they're just fine, but someone's bound to say you're the worst teacher that ever walked the earth. And sometimes that stings a little bit.
I think something else, this too shall pass, sorry, to kind of
yeah, you're fine.
Another applicability, especially probably for you, is marking. When you have those piles of papers, and you have to, this too shall pass, you have to remind yourself, because sometimes you feel the end is never going to come to this, and just reminding yourself. That's something actually I didn't write too much about in the book, but I really think Stoicism can help the idea of like discipline, and I like the idea of teaching, making you a better person. Well, marking in a weird way, it does get you to practice some of those Stoic virtues, temperance and everything else. So I think there is some value in marking, even though it can seem at times like it absolutely sucks and it's just soul, draining, but there are some benefits to it.
Yeah, grading is often listed as the least favorite activity for folks in our profession, I believe. Yeah, it can be quite exhausting, and depending on the assignment, of course. But that being said, how about we make sure to, before we go, let's say there's a listener or two out there that has considered going into teaching, and now they're like, ooh, this is intimidating. Should I pursue this? What would you say to someone who's considering going down that road of becoming a teacher, no matter what level of teacher they want to be? What would you?
Yeah, I'd tell them to pursue it. I know even a lot of people I know later on in their life are thinking, I want to get into a rewarding career. I want to get into teaching, and I always encourage them. I think a piece of advice is like, just don't think as soon as you graduate and maybe you get a job that you're just gonna, have the students at the edge of their seats and everything's just gonna go swimmingly. I joke in the book, like, don't think it's gonna be Dead Poet Society where the kids are gonna be standing on their desk saying, "My captain." And if that doesn't happen, then you're just an awful teacher. Like, it takes, I'm only, probably a few years in, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of teacher I want to be. And that's probably when I finally get a hold of what I think that is, what identity, it'll probably end up changing, and I'll have to rethink that. So yeah, just don't think going into it. A lot of people say that's the thing. They say, teacher burnout is really high after the first few years. I think that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, they feel like they might not be living up to that ideal that they had of being a teacher. And a lot of times that's fabricated, and other times it's just like takes time to get good at it. It takes a whole career to get good at it. But number two, and I write about this in the book, sometimes we think that if you're not happy all the time in the classroom that it's not for you. If you're not experiencing like positive emotions all the time, then this is not the career for you. When no, like it's a lot more than that. If teaching's your passion, talk about like passion translates to suffer. So you're going to be you're going to have to suffer in your profession. There's going to be a hardship, but that's normal. And there's going to be years where you're going to be tested a lot more than others. And it's all just going to give you those tools to be a better teacher in the future. So yeah, when it's rough, don't think, well, this means I'm not a good teacher. I'm not meant to be a teacher, right? It just is a learning experience. And eventually down the line, you'll get comfortable and you'll be able to do that kind of skill that you were lagging before, and then you'll learn other things. So yeah, just don't take things too personally, I think, and just be very patient in your career because you'll learn many things along the way.
Great advice, Ryan. The Stoic Teacher, Ancient Mind Hacks to Help Educators Foster Resiliency, Optimism, and Inner Calm. Ryan, where can folks pick up a copy of this book?
I know it's quite accessible on Amazon. I know Alphabet Publishing, the publisher, is selling it on their website. As well, I think Barnes & Noble Chapters is getting a hold of it in Canada. I think you can order it on Kobo or Kindle, the different platforms. So I think anywhere you could get books, you'll be able to find it. So Amazon.
Great. Are you going to be working on any other works now that you finished this book? This is your first book, right?
Yeah, I know Greg Sadler reached out about maybe writing something for modern Stoicism. I wrote something about how Stoicism could help students a little while before I wrote the book. So I want to write kind of something to do with Stoicism and teaching for modern Stoicism. So, I think that might be my next project. I'll do that in the summer. And then after that, I'm not sure. I know since I published it, my writing routine hasn't been as frequent. So I do want to get back into writing and figure out what do I want to write next. Sometimes I just, write little things and then an idea will kind of pop off of that. So yeah, I'm open to anything at this point.
I've often wondered, as a college instructor, I have to have a teaching philosophy whenever I apply for promotion or apply for a job. They want to see your philosophy of teaching, how you teach, how you think learning happens. And I've been wanting to take a look at the old one I still have and rewrite it with some Stoicism influence to try to figure out what that would look like. Have you taken that approach at all? Have you had to write a teaching philosophy?
No, but I wish we actually did that. I know I've heard like sometimes in the States, teachers being asked that, but I found so far in my career, it's never been a question I've been asked, nor have others been asked. It's almost been like at the end of the interview when they're like, oh, like what's something that you want to add? Here's my philosophy of teaching. But no, it's never been something that I've really had to really been asked. But definitely, I think what I've learned so far with Stoicism would definitely have an influence over writing one. I'm sure mine, if I had to write one, it would be something to the degree of that dichotomy of control, right? Focusing on the things you can focus on, dropping the things you can't. And when you do that, the day will just go by a lot better. And you'll just, you'll have that more desire to go back the next day when you do that.
Absolutely. Well, Ryan, thanks for joining the podcast this week. And I highly recommend everyone check out the book, The Stoic Teacher by Ryan Racine. You can find it on Amazon.com. And make sure to leave him a review once you buy that book. It helps out the author quite a bit when you do that.
Thanks, Steve.
Any parting words?
Oh, just again, thanks for the opportunity to speak. And I love what you're doing at the Sunday Stoic. And just keep up the good work. I'll continue to listen myself.
Well, thanks. Do you want to say the parting words?
Carpe diem.